It was a Friday night and the house was overflowing with noise. Music shook the walls so loudly that conversations turned into people practically yelling over one another just to be heard. The air was thick with cigarette smoke, cheap cologne, alcohol, and something else that smelled like a skunk burning somewhere in the background. Tom sat sunk into one of the most uncomfortable couches he'd ever felt, wedged between two people whose eyes looked completely lifeless, yet somehow laughed at everything like it was the funniest moment of their lives. Around him were flashing lights, slurred conversations, empty bottles scattered across tables, and groups of people pretending that they were having the time of their lives while trying to outrun themselves for a few hours. His friends had pressured him into coming to a house party because they were convinced that he needed to get out more. But from the moment he walked in, he already felt disconnected from everything and everyone around him. None of it reached him. None of it felt real to him. He listened to others speak and felt lost in their slang, when normal words could have been used to express much more depth to their conversations. After sitting there trying to force himself to enjoy the night, he finally stood up and told his friends that he was going to head home and thanked them for inviting him anyway. Almost instantly, one of them laughed and told him that he just wasn't fun anymore, that he was always such a Debbie Downer. So Tom did the best thing that he could do, and he forced a smile, brushed it off, and he walked out of the house as fast as he could. But the moment the cold night air hit him outside, the loneliness hit harder than the noise inside ever could. Somehow, he had just spent hours in a house full of people and still felt completely alone. And on the drive home, with the streets nearly empty and his thoughts getting louder by the minute, he kept replaying the night in his head, trying to figure out why he always felt so disconnected from people his own age. No matter how hard he tried, he never felt like he belonged anywhere. Even as a kid, he always connected with older people, more mature people, people who seemed deeper than the crowds around him. He never fit perfectly into any group. He never fully understood the obsession with fitting in. And most of the time, he honestly preferred being alone, even though other people looked at that like there was something wrong with him for it. But underneath all of it, underneath the overthinking and the isolation and feeling of being out of place in almost every room he walked into, all Tom really wanted was the same thing every human being secretly wants deep down inside. To feel like somewhere in the world, that we truly belong. Most people spend the first half of their lives trying to fit in somewhere, and they spend the second half realizing how much of themselves they sacrifice just to be accepted temporarily by the people who were never truly meant to be in their life in the first place. I think one of the loneliest feelings a person can experience is standing in a room full of people while internally feeling completely disconnected from all of them. Laughing when everybody else laughs, nodding along in conversations, pretending to feel comfortable while deep down, the feeling emotionally separates from the entire environment around you. And what makes that feeling even more confusing when you're younger is that nobody really prepares you for it. Nobody tells you that sometimes you can be a genuinely good person and still feel completely out of place almost everywhere you go. Nobody tells you that sometimes your mentality, your emotional depth, your interest or your maturity level, or just the way you naturally see life can easily separate you from the people around you, long before you even understand why it's happening. When you're young, fitting in feels like survival, especially during school, especially during those years where your identity still feels unfinished and fragile, and it's constantly shaped by the opinions of everyone else around you. Everybody wants to belong somewhere, whether it's a sports team, a friend, a group, a relationship, a lunch table, a social circle online, somewhere that makes them feel chosen, somewhere that gives them identity. Because human beings are tribal by nature. We want belonging almost as badly as we want love itself. And when somebody repeatedly feels excluded during those years, it doesn't just hurt socially. It begins affecting the way that they see themselves internally. They start wondering if something about them is wrong, instead of realizing that they may simply be different from the environment that they're trapped inside of. I think about kids that are obsessed with business, with fitness, with philosophy or music, creativity, entrepreneurship, or building a future for themselves while everyone around them only wants to party every weekend and chase temporary validation. I think about the athlete who dedicates his entire life to a sport while everybody else thinks he's just too obsessive or too intense. I think about the emotional, mature girl who can't connect with other people her own age because every conversation around her feels surface level and performative, when all she wants is for someone to look her in the eyes when she's talking, so she knows she's being heard. I think about the introverted kid sitting at the lunch table pretending not to care that nobody invited him anywhere that weekend. I think about the person who changes their personality completely just to avoid the pain of isolation, because loneliness during adolescence can feel emotionally unbearable. And I think what makes this generation's experience even harder is social media. Years ago, if you felt left out, eventually you just escaped it when you went home. Now people carry comparison in their pockets every second of the day and everywhere that they go. Every time they open their phones, they're flooded with images of people appearing either accepted, attractive, loved, socially fulfilled, constantly surrounded by friends, constantly traveling, constantly smiling, constantly belonging somewhere. And over time, people begin questioning themselves without even realizing that it's happening. They start wondering if there's something fundamentally wrong with themselves, because everybody else seems to be connected, and they feel emotionally detached from the world around them. But social media is one of the greatest illusions ever created, because most people are not posting their loneliness. They're not posting the nights they cry alone. They're not posting the anxiety, the insecurity, the feeling of not belonging anywhere, or the emotional emptiness that hits them when the camera turns off and the room becomes quiet again. People post performances of happiness because modern culture has turned identity into marketing. Everybody is branding themselves these days, curating themselves, editing themselves into socially desirable versions. And the dangerous part is that younger people are consuming these performances constantly while comparing them to their own unfiltered reality. So, naturally, many people begin feeling emotionally inadequate. They begin feeling behind socially, behind physically, behind financially or emotionally. And eventually, many people stop asking themselves who they truly are, and they begin asking a much more dangerous question instead. What version of me will people accept? Honestly, I think that question destroys people because once somebody starts abandoning parts of themselves for approval, they begin disconnecting from their real identity. They change the way they talk, they change their interests, they change their humor. They pretend to enjoy things that they secretly hate. They laugh at jokes they don't find funny. They hide the parts of themselves that feel too different because they're terrified of rejection. And for a little while, it works. People finally accept them. They finally get invited places. They finally feel included. But eventually, something strange starts happening internally. They begin feeling lonely, even while surrounded by people, because deep down, they understand something painful. Nobody around them actually knows who they are anymore. They traded authenticity for approval. And maybe that's why so many people today feel emotionally disconnected from themselves. It could be because they built identities based on what received validation, instead of what actually reflected their soul honestly. I think one of the saddest things about modern life today is how many people are secretly living divided against themselves. One version exists publicly, polished and socially acceptable, while another version exists privately underneath all of feeling unseen or disconnected and emotionally trapped. After a while, people become so used to performing that they forget what authenticity even feels like anymore. They become addicted to external validation because it temporarily numbs the insecurity of not fully accepting themselves internally. Every notification becomes emotional reassurance. Every compliment becomes temporary relief. Every social interaction becomes another unconscious attempt to answer the same exhausting question over and over and over again. Am I enough for people to keep loving me if I fully become myself? And I think a massive percentage of people are terrified to truly find out. The harsh reality is this: You're not supposed to fit in everywhere. Some people mature faster emotionally than the people that are around them. Some personalities are too deep for shallow environments. Some people naturally think differently from the majority. Some people become obsessed with growth while everyone around them remains obsessed with distraction. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, this podcast is literally based around conversations that I couldn't have with most of my family or friends because it's not normal to think the way I do. But I also think modern society has made individuality feel dangerous. The algorithms reward sameness. The trends reward sameness, and so does viral culture. Everybody subconsciously learns how to perform versions of themselves that receive approval online. And younger generations are growing up inside systems where standing out socially feels emotionally risky. So people suppress themselves to avoid judgment. They shrink themselves to remain accepted. They become quieter, less authentic, less expressive, and less real. And over time, that suppression becomes emotional exhaustion because pretending is exhausting. Pretending to enjoy conversations that don't stimulate you. Pretending to care about things that don't matter to you. Pretending to feel connected to people who don't truly understand you at all. Pretending so nobody calls you sensitive. Pretending to be somebody else long enough that eventually, even you forget who you actually are underneath it all. Honestly, some of the most emotionally lost people in the world are not broken people. They're simply people who spent too many years forcing themselves into environments that were not compatible with who they actually were internally. They interpreted rejection as evidence that they were flawed, instead of understanding that they may just be standing in the wrong room. Our environment changes everything. A person can feel completely invisible in one environment and deeply valued in another. And I know how painful it feels when you realize certain groups will never fully accept you, especially when you genuinely tried, especially when you wanted connection badly, and especially when you watched other people seem to belong naturally, while you felt like you were constantly forcing yourself emotionally just to keep up socially. But maturity is understanding that not every door is supposed to open for you. Some rejection is protection. Some exclusion is redirection. Some loneliness is temporary separation, guiding you towards people who will eventually understand you without requiring you to betray yourself first. Because the cost of forcing yourself to fit into places that require you to abandon your real personality, eventually, that becomes your mental health. You become anxious, emotionally disconnected, uncertain of who you are anymore, exhausted from performing constantly, and eventually, you reach this strange point where you no longer even know whether people truly love you or not, or whether they only love the version of yourself that you created to survive socially. I think that realization breaks a lot of people, because human beings can survive loneliness much longer than they can survive inauthenticity. There's something deeply painful about recognizing that. You've spent years abandoning parts of yourself, hoping other people would finally choose you, only to discover you no longer fully recognize yourself afterwards. I think one of the most important transitions a human being can make in this life is shifting from how do I make everyone accept me to where am I naturally understood without pretending. That question changes everything, because long term, the healthiest thing a person can do is stop building an identity around external validation, and they start building an identity on internal alignment. You find your environments connected to your actual interests, your values, and your actual personality. If you love fitness, surround yourself with people who respect discipline. If you love creativity, surround yourself with creators. If you love being emotionally deep, stop forcing yourself into emotionally shallow environments, hoping that they'll eventually understand you. If you're ambitious, stop apologizing for wanting more in life. And if you love learning, stop shrinking your curiosity because other people mock intelligence to protect their own insecurity. And yes, becoming yourself always feels lonely at first, because becoming yourself usually requires temporary separation from environments where the fake version of you was accepted. But I promise you this, loneliness while being authentic hurts far less than loneliness while pretending. And maybe that's what so many people are truly experiencing right now. Not just loneliness from lack of connection, but loneliness from lack of authentic connection. Being surrounded by people while feeling emotionally unseen because every relationship around them was built around performance instead of truth. I also think people underestimate how powerful individuality actually becomes later in life. The people who eventually build themselves a meaningful life are rarely ever the people who blended in perfectly everywhere that they went. Usually, they were the people who felt different at first, the people who thought differently, the people who felt misunderstood, even the people who couldn't fully connect with every environment because internally they were becoming something different from the people around them. History has always belonged to the people who were willing to remain authentic despite temporary social discomfort. And maybe the hardest part about feeling out of place is the amount of self-doubt that it creates over time, because repeated rejection teaches people to question themselves automatically. They start filtering every interaction through insecurity. Was I awkward? Did I say something wrong? Why do I always feel different? Why does this connection seem so easy for everyone else? But what people fail to realize is that some of the deepest people in the world often feel isolated precisely because they experience life differently from the majority of people around them. They crave depth in a world addicted to distraction. They crave sincerity in a culture built around performance. They crave meaning while everyone else is chasing attention. And that disconnect can feel unbelievably lonely until they eventually find people who operate on the same emotional frequency. So if you're listening to this right now and you feel out of place in life, I need you to understand something deeply. Not fitting in everywhere is not failure. Being misunderstood is not failure. Being different is not failure. Sometimes it simply means your life is trying to move you towards people who actually see you clearly. And until you find those people, don't abandon yourself just to avoid temporary loneliness, because losing yourself is far more painful than being alone for a little while. Before we wrap up today's episode, I want to thank our sponsor, Hearts and Halters, located in Medford, New York. If you've ever wanted to learn horseback riding, improve your horsemanship skills, or spend more time around these incredible animals, Hearts and Halters offers horseback riding lessons, grooming and tacking lessons, summer camps, and hands-on experiences for riders of all skill levels. And as a special offer for listeners of The Human Factor, mention the show and you'll receive 10% off your first 30-minute lesson. You can give Michelle a call at 631-905-8898. Again, that's 631-905-8898 to learn more and schedule your first visit. You can also reach them by checking the email on the bottom of the screen. So whether you're looking to get started with horses for the first time or you're looking to build your confidence and skills in the saddle, Hearts and Halters provides a welcoming environment where you can learn, grow, and enjoy the experience. And with that, I want to thank all of you for spending part of your day with me. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who might enjoy it too. So until next time, live like nobody's watching and smile like somebody is. I'll see you on the next one.